I thought that I would open a dance school.
What are some of the key differences between how you conduct user interviews in these different geographical locations?
Both roles require understanding of either its users or either its buyers, right? So a lot of products needs to be, if not mobile first, sometimes even mobile only. So I was born in Vietnam, but when I was 2 years old, my parents moved to Ukraine. Back in the days, there was a tight relationship between Vietnam and Soviet Union, Northern Vietnam to be exact. So a lot of people got scholarships and they were, sent to USSR to study. And my father was one of those people. So he first came to Moscow to study. He loved the city, loved the place. But then he transferred for his further studies to Kiev, Ukraine, and that's where he decided to stay and bring over the family. So I spent most of my childhood in Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine. And I only moved back to Vietnam when I was when I finished university, but my childhood was there. So all my formative years, all my friends, like everything that I know happened there. So that's about how was I when I was a child? I think I was so when I was like little, like before the teenage years, I was super quiet. I was very introverted, not loud. I didn't have many friends. But once I got into those teenage years, I became a little bit rebellious. So that's when I started being interested in dancing, hip hop, and all of that, stuff that are not very, I would say, girly. I listen to hip hop a lot. Also rock even. So that's when I became a little bit rebellious. And I think, I'm still like that kind of inside.
Very characteristic of angsty people or angsty youth. I feel like I had a phase as well when I was into the kind of emo scene. I think it's just something in our generation. I think everybody kind of goes through that. I was going to ask about particularly growing up in the Ukraine as a Vietnamese person. Is there given the fact that there was this kind of relationship between Eastern Europe and Vietnam, it seems like I would assume that there was a significant amount of Vietnamese people in the Ukraine. So what was that like? Did you ever feel like an outsider growing up?
No, I never felt like an outsider. And you're right, there was a big diaspora of Vietnamese in Kiev and in Ukraine in general, a couple of thousands of people. So I grew up, I had my Ukrainian friends who I was super close with, but I also had my Vietnamese friends as well. And I never felt alienated from either of the group. I always blend in pretty well. And I don't know, growing up there it was really cool. I felt I was different, of course. Visually, I was different. So people would notice me. They would be curious about me. But I never felt ostracized or anything like that. Very, very welcomed.
Right. It wasn't a very discriminatory kind of time, I guess, growing up.
No, actually not. And the funny thing is my mom always told me that actually here, you're being treated equally. Whereas I would imagine if you grew up in Vietnam, you would have to jump through the hoops to get to certain places, because there are a lot of favoritism, even, corruption at certain levels, or you need to know someone in order to get somewhere. But in Ukraine, I was just another kid. So it's so even funny that I got, because I had a good language ability, so my Ukrainian was very good. So I even got to, how do you call those? Special programs? No, not special programs. Olympiads? Is it Olympiads? For Ukrainian language.
Oh, really?
Yes. Every year they would send a couple of students to those, nationwide or local Olympiads to compete on a subject. And because I was good at languages, I was sent to compete on a Ukrainian language subject. So it was very ironic because I remember I was late to the Olympiad by a couple of minutes and everyone were sitting there already. And then I walk in and this like Asian girl walk into Ukrainian Olympiad. Yeah, people were curious.
How were you compared to the other people in the competition?
I don't remember. I think I did get like third place or something, but I don't remember those times very well.
When you started like growing up into your like formative years of your adolescence and going to like a technology high school, from what it seems, what was that experience like? Or like, is that something that's normal in the Ukraine for people to do?
No, it wasn't. It was totally random. So the story was like this. I had do you call them headmasters? Like a head teacher?
Like a principal?
Yeah, principal teacher, yeah. In 8th grade. And he moved to a different school. And one day he came back just to share about his life and like what's been going on. And he said, yeah, I'm working in this school. We only have 4 lessons a day. And back in my school, we had like 6 to 7 lessons a day. And I was like, what? Like 4 lessons a day? I wanna go there. Like, why should I study more when I can study less? So I got curious. And you won't believe it, but the same week, I asked my mom to transfer me to that school. And that was a technology school. I didn't even know what school it was. But once I got there, I realized that those 4 lessons are actually double lessons. So instead of 1 hour, it would be 2 hours. So actually, I had to study more.
But I guess when you were in the school, it was more focused on like technology and stuff because it's a technology high school is probably more specialized than a regular high school.
Absolutely, it was. I didn't know that though, but it was a great surprise. So the way it was structured is that you could choose either to go into more web development specialty or more like interior design or architecture even. So there were 2 streams. So I went into the web design route. And I remember, was it WebWeaver? There's some software. Dreamweaver, yeah.
Yeah, Adobe Dreamweaver.
Yes, we used that to build our project websites. And yeah, there are a lot of funny stories around that. But that's what we did in high school. Yeah.
That's interesting because I think there's a kind of notion between specializing when you're early and kind of like also going through like a general kind of like undecided major kind of path. And usually those kind of conversations happen when you're in university and you're deciding what major you actually want to do. So it's interesting that you were able to kind of at least try out one of those streams when you were in high school. Do you think that that ultimately led you down the path of continuing with your career in like the technology sector?
It helped, definitely, but I didn't see it as my career path because, like, to be honest, I didn't know what my career path would be, and that is just something that happened to be helpful down the road. But I didn't plan it around technology.
Did you have any like aspirational careers that you were potentially thinking about before going into university?
I thought that I would open a dance school.
School, okay.
I was so deep into dancing. So there are a lot of stuff, around, my dance extracurriculars that I thought would inform, my career. Oops, sorry. But yeah, that I thought that was everything I knew. And I thought that I would open a school, maybe not in Ukraine, but in Vietnam, because in Ukraine there were a lot of schools already. But yeah, I never thought that I would work in tech.
I see. And when you went to university also in the Ukraine, you end up majoring in like a foreign language. What was that decision like? And what motivated you to pursue that?
That's another random story as well. So throughout my career, you will see that a lot of stuff that happened was because of a situation or because of something very random that I didn't really plan out. So the university happened as follows. First, it was close to my home. So the commute time, like it was just like literally walking distance from my home. Second, it because my mom, she's a teacher. She was a middle school teacher. She taught languages like and other subjects as well. And because I was, pretty good with languages, so I thought, oh, maybe I can teach languages as well. So that was the second reason. But the main reason why I chose that school is because my dad told me just choose something, but in a year I'm having this business with Korean partners. So in a year time, I'll send you to Korea to study. So just pick whatever. Don't worry. So I picked whatever. And because it was close to my home, I was like, yeah, whatever. I got a scholarship as well. So I didn't have to pay for my education. So that was a big plus. So I didn't really think of pursuing anything else. But then after a year, my dad was like, sorry, it's not happening. You're not
God.
going to Korea. We're not doing business anymore. So you got to stick with what you chose.
And you decided to kind of just continue pursuing that
Yeah.
for like the whole degree.
Yeah.
Was there any reason to change, I guess, career paths?
It was scary to change. It would mean that I lost 1 year. So I thought, okay, there's 3 years left. Maybe I should just finish and then I'll figure it out. Honestly, I didn't plan much. I just went with the flow.
But I guess 1 year compared to 3 years is like...
True, but then I had to, that would mean that I would have to apply for the next year because I already missed the,
And there's no guarantee that you would get into a different program as well.
Yeah, exactly. I would have to spend some time on studying while I'm studying here. So yeah, it would be hectic.
And throughout your university career as well, did you feel like you were motivated to go towards a certain path or like a kind of career that you wanted to pursue after?
I thought I would do something around teaching because I already had a couple of students, Vietnamese students, who wanted to improve their Russian or Ukrainian language in order to study in Ukraine. So I did tutoring, and I thought, I was pretty good at it. So I thought I would just continue doing it on a larger scale, like teaching courses or teaching at like learning centers at schools. But I was also teaching dancing as well. When I was 16, that was my first job, teaching dancing. So I thought, my career would be around teaching.
So I guess like the influence of technology hadn't really set itself like inside you yet.
No.
Until like after university. And I guess when you graduated, you decided to move back to Vietnam as you planned before. So what was the idea or like the plan from there on?
Mm-hmm. So back then, in my generation, I didn't have a lot of role models back in Ukraine who I knew who were successful in getting local jobs and competing with Ukrainians. A lot of them actually went back to Vietnam because that's where they have competitive advantage of knowing a language, right? That was pretty in demand in Vietnam. So I just didn't believe in my skills to be able to pull it off in Ukraine and get something decent. So I was like, why not just try Vietnam? And especially since my older brother moved back to Vietnam at the time and he, had a good job there. So I was like, I'm just going to follow suit and check it out. Yeah.
And when you go back to Vietnam, you start a film production studio, I guess. So what was the idea then, like, or like the motivation? Because I guess it seemed like in terms of a career path, you didn't really know what you wanted to pursue. So you're pretty like good at kind of like just experimenting and actually like going down a path. So what was the idea with the film production studio?
Okay, so film production studio, it started actually in Ukraine. So we had this crew of 3 Vietnamese folks. We were dancing, and back in the day, it was popular to film dancing videos and add some, storytelling around that, make it into like short movies. So that's when our kind of passion for media production started. Not so much on my end because I was just contributor. I was a dancer. I helped with organizing stuff. I was not filming or editing or anything. But that's when the interest in, creative stuff started. But another reason I moved to Vietnam is because my brother was working in a tech company. It's a search engine and browser. So pretty big deal. And he told me that, hey, you should come here and you would be able to get a job here because of your language abilities. So I did just that. So yeah.
Did your knowledge in languages, did that help with your job as a marketer? Because I know that you went into marketing first, kind of as
Yes.
like where you started off your career.
Yeah.
And this even happened when you were at the film production studio.
Yeah.
So where did marketing kind of come into the picture?
Because I didn't have technical skills. I didn't have editing skills, shooting skills, or anything like that. So my role was essentially in that, dance crew. My role was to market, was to, put stuff out there in the social media. And when I got a job with that company, the search engine and browser, it was the being assistant to marketing manager. So it kind of I naturally fit into that. But of course, like the prerequisite for that role was knowledge of Russian and Vietnamese.
I guess like since you've naturally just chased down that career path, you would eventually just gain a lot of skills as a marketer.
Yeah.
To the point where you even became a marketing manager at a couple
Yeah.
of other companies subsequently after
Yes.
that. So following this path of marketing, it's just interesting to me kind of how you would eventually get into the idea of UX research. So what was that transition like from going from marketing standpoint and eventually finding your way into UX?
Because of my language skills, I had to do a lot of localization, working with local vendors in order to adapt products that would be brought in from Russian companies. So when I was like working on the copy, working on, customizing the design to local market, I became drawn to product development. I was interested in design, also like how to convert people from, website visits into customers or into like whatever call to action that we had, right? So that's when I understood like, actually, I don't enjoy marketing as much. I enjoy building something that would market itself. Does it make sense? Yeah, it doesn't really need too much push. It's just good enough on its own so people can use it.
So when you decided that you wanted to actually move into the UX side of things, was there anything that you think that helped you make that transition official?
Yes, even though I started in marketing in that company. So that was a fintech company, the second company after the search engine and browser.
Infinito, right?
Infinito, yeah. When I started localizing the websites and adapting the design, the management kind of saw the benefit of me focusing on just that. And I also proactively asked for that. So during my career, I always like when I felt that I like something, I always proactively ask, like, can I just do this and not do other stuff? So yeah, they saw that my value is more beneficial for the company when it's put into the website development. So that's how I transitioned into UX. And honestly, UX was not a career that was super fleshed out at that point. I didn't even really know what UX was. I was just doing it. And I thought it was something like marketing / web development, but it actually was UX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Abby talked about kind of like this interesting time period where UX was more like a nice to have at a lot of companies. And I guess at the time, if you were able to even get into a UX position at any company, it was more of an experiment than something that would actually have an established process. So in that sense, do you feel like you learned a lot of like your UX practices from kind of just doing and experimenting locally?
Absolutely. I learned everything by just trial and error. I was self-taught. I didn't know, even the 10 heuristics of the UX. Like I didn't know those concepts at all. I just kind of observed what's been working in Russia because our investors and our company, the management was came from Russia, right? So my task was to understand what's working there and how can we adapt it to the local market. So naturally, I started observing like, okay, I know these three services are the biggest fintech services in Russia. What makes them stand out? What makes people, love about their products? So understanding that and trying to translate that into Vietnamese market. Of course, I made so many mistakes because the mentality of the two markets is absolutely different. But there's some stuff that actually worked. And yeah, I worked a lot with conversions. So trying to understand how to, optimize that whole journey for the users. And a lot of that worked by trial and error.
Mm-hmm. And we're gonna get into the internationalization and kind of like the differences later on, but it's interesting how from a strategic point of view, you were able to translate some of these skills from the marketing side, and like your ways of thinking, and then apply it into like the product sense. So that's I can visualize how those two fields kind of blended for you.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of overlap. Both roles require understanding of either its users or either its buyers, right? And understanding of the market as well, the behavior. It's just marketing looks at more like bigger picture, like what's the demographics of our user, what's the location, age, gender, in order to sell the product effectively, while user research looks into a particular behavior of a set of users. So although there is overlap, but the goals are different.
Because the user is not ultimately the buyer at the same time. Like for example, when I was in university and taking this business course, you could look at toys, for example, right? Like the buyers are the parents, but the actual users are like the kids who use the toys.
Yes.
So research in that aspect is very different.
Very different. Yes.
So before we get into your move to Canada to do your master's in user experience, you also had like a brief stint at Facebook. Where you were a small to medium-sized business growth manager there for Workplace, which was a product out of Facebook. What was that experience like? And also, what motivated you to try that out?
So my now husband, he moved to Singapore due to work, and eventually I would move there with him as well. So I started looking for jobs. I was super happy at Infinto. My team was so awesome. Like they felt like family. Like I'm still friends with them until this day, but I needed to move to Singapore. So I started looking for a job, and this opportunity presented itself. Like I got contacted by an agency who work with Facebook, and they were looking for contractors. And at first, I almost said no because it was a sales position. And I was like, no, I'm not a salesperson. I don't know much about it. But then I thought, okay, why not just try? Like, what am I losing? Like the worst case, I'm just gonna, learn the interview process in Singapore. So that is super beneficial. So I took it. It worked out. They liked me. They liked my knowledge of Vietnamese market. And I ended up doing sales. So to your question, how was the experience? It was a roller coaster, honestly. It naturally, I'm not a very, super outgoing person. Like you need to have a certain type of personality to be in sales, especially enterprise sales when it involves talking to C-level executives, right? And I wasn't very good with doing small talks and all of this warm up, activities in order to establish a good relationship so you can sell such a big product like Workplace by Facebook. So even though I really, really enjoyed being there and learning from the smartest people I ever met at Facebook, but I didn't feel like I was a good fit or a natural fit for that role. Yeah.
So it was not really an intended path that you wanted to go down. But
no.
At least it was an experience that you tried. Would you say that you had any regrets from going down that path?
No, actually, no. Like even though through all the suffering that I had, the stress that I had, it taught me so much. It built my work ethics. Um, like that's when I established my work ethics, because it was extremely fast-paced environment. You had to be hyper efficient, hyper focused, and be an excellent problem solver. So I feel like, yeah, even though I wasn't probably not the best as a salesperson, but that's when I learned everything else.
Like all those non-technical skills.
Non-technical skills, yes, and how the enterprises work, how they grow.
Right. And also how to work for like a big company as well, because
Yes.
I guess compared to your other experiences, like Facebook must have been like just a massive change in terms of organizational structure.
Yes and no, because Workplace by Facebook was kind of a startup within Facebook. So we felt like almost like a different, company, like just living under this big umbrella. And Workplace, back then, they just had like 50 something developers, uh, not too big of a marketing department, product department, and sales people. Yeah, it wasn't that big.
So yeah, you talked about moving to Singapore, and I guess after your role at Facebook, you would eventually move to Canada. So I'm kind of
Yes.
curious about that in general, and what motivated both you and your husband to move here.
Mm-hmm. So what the biggest motivation was to tap into the entertainment industry that is so developed here. So he is a concept designer. He works in films and games, and those industries, like, they mostly concentrated in North America. So it's LA. Um, Seattle, Vancouver is a hub for movies, right? Movie production. So we wanted to move here for him, but also for me, like, I didn't really mind, because Singapore, as much as I liked it, it was just too hot for me. I came from Ukraine, right? I'm used to cold, so like living in Asia in general, I was just literally suffering through the heat. Like I'm not very tolerant to heat.
Yeah, I feel like when I go back home, it's like if the AC is not on,
Yes, no.
then I'm just gonna treat this like a sauna, and I'm just gonna like enjoy it for a bit, and then I'm like, okay, time to take a cold shower.
Exactly.
So you arrive in Canada, and you decide to do your master's in digital media at the
Yeah.
Center of Digital Media.
Yes.
Did you feel like you needed to do that in order to progress with your career in UX?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons for that. So first of all, it was to fully transition to UX and the product development side of things rather than sales or marketing. And especially, like, I craved that after my, experience with Facebook, where I didn't fit, my skill set didn't really fit in with the role. So I was like, okay, I need to make a change. I need my work to bring me joy every day. So that's when I thought that taking a master's degree would definitely help, so I can, spend the whole year focusing on doing just that, rather than just, I also wanted to get more fundamentals that I didn't get when I was self-taught and just like trying stuff, on the job. So I wanted to get more fundamentals. So that's why I decided to get a degree. And also, obviously, it would help me and my husband with moving to Canada. It's the easiest path to move to Canada. So two things aligned.
And yeah, I feel like when you're transitioning between fields, especially as more people move in towards the tech sector, it's usually better to kind of just have like a very hard transition rather than just slowly blend in, because I guess you miss out a lot of those, as you said, those fundamentals that a lot of other people in the field have.
For sure.
So what was the experience like for you doing your master's in digital media? Did you think that it set you up for success ultimately?
100%. For sure. So what we did, even though it's a master's degree, but it felt more like a never-ending hackathon. So for the whole year, we had 4 projects to work on. And every project for like roughly 3 months, we would develop a product. So we would form teams, and the students in that program varied from developers, product designers, artists, game developers. So there are like people from different backgrounds. So we would come together, we would form these groups, and we would work on a product. And I assumed the role of either product manager or UX designer or UX researcher. So that year gave me a possibility to just focus on, product building, and gave me a boost and open opportunities for my later job in SAP. I think that without that master's program, it would be much, much harder for me to break into UX coming like in Canada.
And most people, when they're making that transition from going into UX, they either take a boot camp or they'll do another degree.
Yeah.
Given that you've done your master's and that we've had other guests who've done boot camps as well, do you think that the master's was a better program for yourself? Kind of like looking back?
I think bootcamp would work as well, but because I wanted something more long term and to really hone into fundamentals, I chose the master program. And not all the master programs would help with UX. I think this is the only one I found that is related, that included UX, right? Others, like, I don't think there's any specific master's program on UX. So yeah.
And you had like a longer timeline as well, because I think you said that you were going to set yourself for a year to just study UX, whereas bootcamp is sometimes like just a couple of months.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving into SAP right after university, so usually people would spend a couple of months finding jobs and stuff like that. What was the job hunting process like, and how did you feel like you eventually landed SAP?
It was all over the place, my process, because of the nature of this program, where we could try ourselves out in different roles: product management, project management, UX design, UX research. So I tried to apply everywhere, and for any of these 4 positions, and it worked terribly not well because like you need to focus. I noticed that in Canada here, you need to choose and stick to it. Choose a specialty, stick to it, and focus on it. So when I spent a couple of months trying to get product management positions, but then I was like, I don't have any actual product management experience. Maybe it's not a good way to do it. So then I was like, UX is something I've been always enjoying. Let me just focus on that. So I went to this meet and greet in SAP, the internship meet and greet, and I met my future manager there. I talked to her, made a good impression. She was amazing. Got an interview, and I was actually applying for project management position. But then she saw me always talking about UX, and she was like, "Oh, actually, we do need a lot of help in UX. Why don't I just open a position, like a UX position for you?" So that's what happened.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because like I feel like oftentimes these kind of informal chats, they open up opportunities, and if they're not on a job portal, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not looking for that, right?
Exactly.
So that's really nice that you were able to build up that relationship and eventually work your way into SAP. And you were there for less than a year, I know.
Yes.
But how was that experience overall as a UX researcher and designer at the same time?
It was great. But I was more of like, I started as a junior, right? So, but what they actually needed, I think, is someone who can advocate for UX in SAP. SAP traditionally is a very engineering-driven company. They didn't place too much of importance on user experience, and only now they're trying to revamp it, right? A couple of years. So, that's why I feel like for that team, for that product, they needed someone who has leverage, who has a voice to advocate for UX. So then it trickles down into actual development. But I'm kind of trying to advocate from the bottom up, not from top down. So that would take up too much of my time rather than actually doing UX. So I thought that I loved that experience. It was great. And I didn't plan to leave. I just saw later's opportunity. I couldn't miss it. So that's why I didn't stay there for longer. But I didn't plan to leave, to be honest.
So it's like 10 months in and you learn about later.
Yes.
And obviously like we've been working together for like a year and a half now. But how did you even come across that opportunity in the first place?
So a couple of months before that, I started looking into social media management tools for my husband because he's an artist. He needs to, put his work out there. So Instagram, all of those platforms are the best places for him to get visibility. So I started looking into those programs, and I was choosing between Buffer and Later, and I chose Later because of the UX, because of the price, and because it was founded locally. So I was like, holy, this is awesome. Because in Vancouver, there are not that many startups that are founded locally, right? And especially in SAP, when you always need to report to the headquarters in Germany, you can't really impact the decisions that much. So I thought, oh wow, this job posting came out. They are based here. They are an awesome company. I'm actually using them. Like the stars aligned.
And then you looked on the careers page, and I guess you would see a UX researcher position there.
I didn't look. I just saw it on LinkedIn. I saw the job posting on LinkedIn. So I didn't specifically go to Later to look for it. Yeah.
And so you applied for it and you eventually got it. But kind of curious, what was your application process like with Later? Was it easy? Did it go smoothly, or because we've had people on the podcast who have just had very like interesting kind of experiences with the interview, especially because we've gone from a very small startup to kind of like a growing company with growing pains and stuff like that. So I'm kind of just curious about your personal experience with the interview process.
Yeah. So the process itself, there were hiccups actually in the very, very, very beginning. So I applied. I actually talked to Mark, our product manager, first. I got connected to him through another product manager I know. So I asked about the company, about the vibe, the culture. He positioned it in a way that I was like, holy, I should like do this. This sounds too awesome to, ignore. So then I applied, never heard back for a couple of weeks. But apparently I never heard back because Trisha, the person who was recruiting, she sent an email, but it landed in my junk. So I never received it. And after a couple of weeks, and it happened to me and Kieran, another user researchers, because we were, interviewing at the same time. So Abby, my now UX manager, asked the recruiter to just do it traditional way, just call them. So when Trisha, she called us, we were like, wait a minute, like we didn't know, sorry, we didn't ignore you, we want to apply, it's just we never got it. So then after that the process went super smooth.
I see. Okay, so just a slight hiccup and eventually you would get into the position. So it looked like it worked out at the end, I guess. So it's been about a year and a half since you've joined, and we've had the chance of working closely together for some projects. I'm just kind of curious about whether or not Later met your expectations from the beginning, and how has the work experience been?
It's not only met expectation, it exceeded expectations. Like this is hands down one of my favorite places I worked in. I love my experience in Asia, don't get me wrong, but this is just something like different. I thought that after Facebook, after working in corporate and after SAP, I knew that I wanted to work in a smaller companies to have more impact in the decision-making process. So this, and especially since my background in social media marketing, this just like aligned super well. So not only professionally, I love Later, but also culturally, like people here are amazing. I'm sure everyone who works in Later says that. So I'm not being original here, but it's true.
Yeah. It's hard to ignore, especially as I've asked the same question to everybody who's come on. It's basically the same thing. It's about the people. And the thing I like the most about our kind of UX and product side of things is that we're very close in terms of like how we work. But I also feel like just in general, like the relationships between the people are very genuine. And as much as it is a job, it also does feel like we have a lot of fun, if not too much fun sometimes.
Good amount. We got a good amount of fun.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So given that you've had experience with products across Europe, Asia, and now North America, there's this kind of increase of globalization throughout the world. And I think it's just starting to hit tech, where it's kind of like now that we're creating companies that kind of have a bigger grasp across the whole world. Now there's this kind of movement towards like a globalized experience rather than just purely interviewing people from like local markets.
Yeah.
Right? And we talked about a little bit about this when you were transferring some of those knowledge. We talked a little bit about this when you were transferring some of that knowledge from the Ukrainian market into the Asian segment, and how they just completely operate on different levels. What would you say are some of the things that kind of differentiate between all of these different markets in terms of your experience as a researcher?
Sure. So there are some things that are universally true no matter what the market is. And good UX is good UX. It doesn't matter. Like look at iPhone. Like it's not just, good for the North American or European market. It's like in Asia, people using it the same across ages even, right? Even like elderly people can still figure it out. So there are some things that are just universal. However, the difference comes in the cultural aspects and behavioral, yes. So what I mean by that is, let's take Vietnam market as an example. So Vietnam market, like the internet there and the like tech penetration there is highly mobile focused. So a lot of products needs to be, if not mobile first, sometimes even mobile only, right? So if you want to tap into larger number of people, then you need to go mobile. Here, it's like, it's both, right? So maybe for later, as an example, I would say in markets like Vietnam, there needs to be more focus on mobile, just because a lot more people use mobile than desktop. It's just historically it happened like that. Not all the households or they have, or even in the professional workplace, people may have PCs at work, but not laptops to bring home to work from laptops. But mobile, everyone has mobile.
Yeah, so I've heard about the penetration of technology, especially like in different regions. And I think it holds true that in North America, a lot of people who grew up like within like the millennial generation, as well as Gen Z, like we both have laptops and we also both have mobile phones.
Yeah.
So like that mindset and the mental model that we kind of come into reflects that. And I think back in Asia, to your point, is kind of like, because they probably grew up with a mobile phone as their first experience and like pathway into technology.
Yeah.
They've kind of shaped their mental model towards that.
Yeah, and a lot of like e-commerce, it's all focused more around mobile experience. Just because, growing up, not everyone could afford a computer. But when mobile phone became so accessible and cheap, and like even smartphones, there are not just iPhones, but there are so many other competitors on the market that, have very affordable phones. That when, it shaped the technology landscape in Vietnam.
And I think it's interesting that there's kind of these two extremes between like a desktop being somewhat of a powerhouse and a mobile phone being kind of like an all-in-one kind of solution.
Yeah.
And I think if we were to meet somewhere in the middle, we would see almost kind of like a tablet. And I think like what I'm seeing that's interesting is that there's kind of like these optimizations and like developments between these two extremes, but not really in the middle. And I'm kind of wondering where that will play a role, especially like in the future, moving towards like certain industries like art, for example.
Yeah.
Like a lot of art actually happens on tablets these days rather
Yeah.
than on a desktop purely or on a mobile phone even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do feel like that trend is going to grow for sure. Like even if I look anecdotally at my parents, they're not using laptops anymore. I just sent them a laptop literally, and my father gave it to granddaughter because he was like, I'm just gonna continue using the iPad. I thought I needed a laptop, but actually I don't.
Yeah, my parents did the same thing. They bought a MacBook and there's like, well, we're not using this.
Yeah.
You want it? I was like, yeah, I'll take it. That's
Yeah.
funny. In terms of the UX research process, given that you've had experience between those two, what are some of the key differences between how you conduct user interviews in these different geographical locations?
Right. So I thought about this question. I didn't actually had a chance to do so like UX as I do it here, UX research as I do it here when I was in Vietnam, because I did more desk research. So what I mean by that is I look at forums, what people say, like social media, the conversations, the groups, but I didn't actively interview people there. I did some interviews, but it was more like we just went out on the streets and did market/user research. So it was not as fleshed out as I do it here. But there are differences in a way that in Vietnam, we are not taught to give feedback. Giving feedback is a skill. Giving feedback, discussing a topic or debating on a topic is a skill. So that's not how our education really works. So I would imagine if I were to come back to Vietnam today, the UX research would need to be slightly different and it would require more probing. So, and getting people comfortable to share feedback. Sometimes maybe even written feedback would be more effective than verbal because again, we are not taught to, discuss things openly. So I would imagine that getting feedback through, emails or through a survey sometimes would work better for markets in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, and to talk about that cultural difference as well. Right? Like when I grew up in Indonesia and the Philippines, it's kind of like, yeah, we're not very openly, we don't openly criticize things.
No, that as well. Yeah.
And that's interesting because like, I guess in North America, because people are just a little bit more liberated with their thoughts.
Yeah.
They tend to express this more freely, and I think in an interview setting that makes sense, and you actually get a lot more because they're not afraid to kind of speak their mind.
Yeah.
And I think in Asia, what I've seen and what I've experienced is that we're just a little bit more conservative.
Absolutely, because like I heard a lot like, can I say negative things about the product? Like, am I not gonna get in trouble? So I would have to explain it's not negative. It's your experience, whether it's good or bad or anything in between, it's your experience. So it's not you criticizing like us, like it's not going to affect us personally. We want to learn, like genuinely learn about your experience. So it gets some like being accustomed to that, giving that kind of feedback. So I would imagine that UX research there would be very different than here.
And I wonder if there's going to be like an impact, especially if you're, let's say, based here and you do like a remote session for a research study with somebody in Asia, right? Because it's going to be, I guess, different there's going to be different ways that they view each other. Especially if you have like a local research team in Asia doing local research with like locals there, you're probably going to get different results from somebody, let's say right now in Vancouver, doing research for a local market in like Vietnam.
Absolutely. It would be more intimidating to do research with someone who is not in your local area. Even if I spoke Vietnamese, I would still there would still be some level of cautiousness to giving feedback because like, I don't know you, you're from far away. Yeah.
We talked about personas briefly, about marketing personas, and how in a marketing setting, we have personas that reflect more on the buyer side of things. Yes. And in UX, we have personas that reflect more on the user side of things. Is there any other kind of differences between research that's done for marketing teams and research that's done on UX settings? And is there actually any more similarities that you think we can take advantage of these days?
Interesting. Let me think about it. In terms of the process, I would say that buyer persona is, again, it's someone who can make a decision to purchase a product or a service. They can be users, but not necessarily, especially when it comes to certain industries like toys you mentioned, or even enterprise sales, right? When I work in Facebook as an example, people who would buy that product would be C-level executives who have control over the budget. But the users are the people, the departments, the teams, the branches, totally different, right? And they have different set of needs and goals, and the buyer personas have their own motivations and goals. So the process, yes, it would be different. So in marketing, we look at demographics, we look at level of income, age, gender,
willingness to buy, stuff like that.
And let me give you an example. Susan, 29, 30 years old. She's a CEO of a startup, for example. She has the power to buy stuff, and her budget for a particular software, let's say, is $10,000. Then there's Michael, 32 years old, and also is a company owner, but they do e-commerce. And their budget for software maybe 7 to 8. So in marketing aspect, they're pretty similar because they have the budget, they have the power to make the decision, and we should tap into them, right, to sell our product. But when it comes to user experience, now that's where it's super different. They have different set of goals. Even the businesses, despite the fact that they're like owners or CEOs, they have different goals. Their businesses are totally different. So we cannot look at them as if we would look from the marketing standpoint. So that's And
I guess when it comes to tackling these different kind of markets and at least in terms of a marketing standpoint, I find that it's perhaps easier to launch different marketing campaigns than it is to create completely unique user experiences for each of these different segments. So I think where some of my understanding is coming to is that there's a little bit more adaptability when it comes to marketing. And I think because of just how quickly we're able to execute on certain campaigns, it allows for a lot more experimentation and segmentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It also depends on the way we're advertising. Let's say Google AdWords or Facebook ads. There are a lot of retargeting options, lookalike audiences. So the platform itself kind of dictates how we should look at the segmentation, whether it's by age, by interest. So Facebook advertising is built a lot around interest, right? Because they can capture that from your social media behavior. Whereas Google advertising, it's built around context. So what do you want in the moment? So we can serve that most relevant stuff to you. So that kind of dictates how marketers would formulate those personas. But in UX, it's totally different. It's around how users use your product, right? So yeah, you're right. There are a lot more. It's a bit, it's faster if you're building marketing personas than user personas.
To kind of tie it back, it's with UX, it's not as trivial to almost segment the app so that they operate differently with different groups. And it's also hard to probably differentiate. You can't just based on a set of questionnaires, you can't necessarily just push them towards a certain experience.
No.
Exactly. And what I find interesting about marketing related to personas as well. It's like depending on the platform, you can also create a different voice for yourself.
Yes.
For example, like on TikTok, a lot of corporate accounts are actually being a little bit more cheeky and a little bit more playful,
Yeah.
which is totally different from probably the other platforms
Instagram,
that they market on. So from a UX point of view, there's less variability and less experimentation that can happen.
I agree. Yeah.
How has your experience in marketing and kind of being in that field for a while, how has that helped you with your research processes? Do you find that as much as you can work on kind of like these standards of UX research, do you find that you're taking some of the skills from your marketing background into your current role right now?
Absolutely. I do. I think one of the probably top examples for me is I adopted this mindset of constantly understanding competitors from marketing. And that's what I'm trying to do a lot here in Later as well. So understand competitors not only from the, standpoint like how competitive are we in terms of pricing or the market share, but around usability as well. Like what features do they have that meets the needs of the users better than we do, or vice versa, right? What can we learn from our competitors? Not even direct competitors, but also indirect competitors as well. Like our users, they don't operate in a bubble. They have the whole infrastructure of things that they need to have to operate their business, right? So small medium businesses in later context, they need to use things like Shopify or other tools like email marketing tools. Like there's so many tools that they need to use.
And what I think is like really interesting as well is that because you're somebody who at the time would have used something like Later, you can kind of put yourself in their shoes a little bit better as well. Which is why I think like often if you're designing for a product, there's almost like two kind of mindset that you can have. Is like one is that you're like totally naive in the sense that you don't really operate in that space, and so you can kind of have a more objective point of view when it comes to learning how to design a better product. But you can also be somebody who's kind of like a niche specialist, who kind of operates within the same industry and sector that the product that you're actually building for is on. And so like those kind of two personas, I feel like aren't those two different personas are different ways that you can tackle your job. And I think not only does your marketing skills transfer into the UX side of things, but also because you're in that industry, it also gives you another way of going into the...
Absolutely. Yes. As a user and as a customer, like that definitely gives me a perspective, a broader perspective on our product rather than if I was never a user of Later.
So what are your main challenges right now when it comes to being a UX researcher? Obviously, as we mentioned, like the company's grown quite significantly in the last couple of years, and as we're kind of creating like new processes every day and every year, what are like some of the main challenges that you face?
The first thing that comes to mind is that it's hard to stay on top of everything that's going on. I'm naturally curious person, so I like to know what's different. How are everyone doing? Like, how is this feature going? Like, how is it gonna contribute to other features that will benefit us and stuff like that? So I like to understand things holistically, but it's quite difficult to stay on top of that when you have so many projects going on. And we work in a quite fast-paced environment. So yeah, the more the product grows, the more kind of niche down you have to be.
And then you can't spend time like learning about like the other stuff.
No, not really. Okay. As I wish I could, but not really.
You know, as somebody who has a lot of these different interests in in your life, especially like coming from like a dance background, being into foreign languages, into marketing, now into UX? How has some of your research skills transferred over into other aspects of your life?
Oh, yes. It's it's really helpful. So I do apply my research skills into building a better life for myself. I like digging into, solve like it into solutions that would solve my problems. I like to read a lot. I like to observe what others are doing. So I'm constantly on Reddit, Twitter, any social media that has a lot of conversations going on. So so the research skills definitely help me with, just finding stuff for myself, for my life that would make it better.
I want to note that Danka is a self-proclaimed discount research expert. So I would like to know some of your top tips about finding the best discounts.
It's not, Joey, it's not about discounts. It's about deals. Deals
Deals.
is something
Okay, sorry.
bigger than discounts.
She's
Okay?
a self-proclaimed deals expert. So
Yes.
we would like to hear some tips from the expert herself.
Okay. So there are a couple of things. First is you should definitely utilize your credit card points. I say it to everyone because there's so many opportunity to get those free points if you use the credit cards correctly. There's this whole concept around credit card churning, which I won't get into too deeply, but anyway, that's a thing that can be easily done by anyone. If implemented correctly, you get a lot of freebies. Then the other stuff is like patience is a very good skill when you want to find a good deal, because let's get furniture as an example. So I was looking for furniture to my home. So instead of like just rushing and getting stuff right now because I need them, the sofa is something you need to sit in, right? Like, of course you need that. But if you can wait a little bit and not rush and just be patient, then the stuff will pop up. Don't rush to get the whole room furnished at the same time. It would be nice, of course, but if you really want to get great deals, then you need to wait.
Yeah, and there's like interesting deals that kind of happen all year. Like, for example, if you're gonna get a Herman Miller chair,
Yes.
best to wait until like November, because that's when they always go on discounts.
Yeah.
There's like an annual sale that happens. So being patient is one. Is there any like platforms that you're like that you strongly advocate for when it comes to looking for specific things?
Facebook Marketplace, number one. Kijiji in Canada. That's another Kijiji and Craigslist. So those two platforms. That's how I bought my EQ table for half the price. The EQ3 tables are super expensive. So yeah,
It was definitely worth it, especially when you consider like how expensive it is to like furnish a whole place. So
yeah,
I'm glad you were able to utilize some of those skills there too.
Yeah, like Googling right is a skill. Seriously. People don't utilize it enough. There's so many answers if you just Google.
So I know the year's just started, and as we move towards the end of the year with later growing as it is there anything that you're looking forward to?
Yes. I've been doing for the past year and a half, I've been doing a lot of qualitative research. So what it means is I talk to users one-on-one. I try to get into, understanding their pain points and needs very deeply. But at the closer to the end of the year, I started doing more quantitative research. So surveys, more large-scale stuff, where, where you can validate your hypothesis at scale. So that's what I want to do more of in the coming year. I found myself very interested in interpreting data, With qualitative studies, it's just like you can talk to like 15, 20 people, but it's like fairly small sample, right? But with quantitative studies, then you can see patterns more clearly.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I feel like I've learned a lot just talking to you about UX research and marketing. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, this is Joey, and thanks for listening in to this week's episode of the Minimum Viable Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a follow. We have new ones coming out every week that I think you'll enjoy just as much. And in the meantime, share it around with your network. Leave a comment or send me questions at Joey Limmena. I'd be more than happy to talk about this episode and any future ones we have planned out.